Asha had always believed that the most honest version of a person appeared when they thought nobody important was watching. Not the version they constructed for boardrooms and presentations and the carefully managed appearances that professional life required. The real one. The one that emerged in the small, unguarded moments, in the way someone treated a waiter, in what they chose to eat when no one was making decisions about them, in whether they looked out the window or at their phone, when they were alone in a room with both options available. She had built a career on reading these versions of people. Not cynically. She was not a cynical person, though she had been in circumstances that would have justified it. She simply paid attention, which was the foundation of everything she had accomplished, and which had served her more reliably than any single strategy, or credential or connection. She was paying attention tonight to the rain on the window of the Meridian Diner on Tverskaya Street, which was not a person, but which had a quality she found worth observing, the way the city lights dissolved through the water on the glass into something softer and less certain than they were in reality, blurred into suggestions of themselves rather than the hard, definite things they were when you looked at them directly. She was in the diner because her car had been delayed, and the rain had made the delay indefinite, and she had been standing on the pavement getting wet for 3 minutes before she had made the practical decision that a diner was better than a pavement and had come inside. She was the CEO of Novasvet Holdings. She had been for 4 years. Before that, she had been the CFO for 3 years. And before that, she had spent 8 years climbing the particular structure of corporate finance, with the focused determination of someone who understood that the structure did not move for you, that you moved through it, and that the moving required everything you had and then a little more. She was 37 years old. She had a corner office and a driver, and a reputation that business publications described in the respectful tones they reserved for people who had done something difficult and sustained it. She had all of these things, and tonight she had a bowl of tomato soup, and a grilled cheese sandwich, and a slice of apple pie, and a cup of coffee in a diner on Tverskaya Street because her car was late and the rain was not. She had ordered more than she intended to. This happened sometimes when she was hungry and tired in combination. The two states producing a version of her that made decisions with less editing than her usual self applied. She had looked at the menu and ordered the soup and the sandwich, and then the waitress had mentioned the apple pie, and something in her had said yes before the editing process had engaged. She was working through the soup when he appeared, not appearing. From nowhere, she had seen him come in peripherally, the way you see things when your attention is elsewhere, but your situational awareness is still running. A large man in a dark sweater and jeans, dark-haired, with the particular physical presence of someone who occupied space without effort or awareness of it, the way certain people do. She had registered him and returned to the soup. He had spoken to the waitress at the counter. She had watched the waitress gesture around the room with the gesture that meant we are full, which the diner was. Every booth occupied with people who had made the same practical decision Masha had made about the rain. He looked at the room. His eyes moved across it with the easy assessment of someone who was not easily bothered by complications, who looked at a situation and identified his options without distress. His options were limited. Every booth had people, except hers, which had her on one side and a soup, and a sandwich and a slice of apple pie, and a coffee on the other. She looked at her table. She looked at the food she had ordered in excess of what she needed. She looked at the rain on the window. She looked at the man who was still standing at the counter with the calm patience of someone who was going to solve this problem eventually, and was not in a hurry about the eventual. She said, across the diner, in a voice that was clear enough to carry but not loud enough to perform, "There is room here." if you need somewhere to sit." He looked at her. She indicated the other side of the booth with a small gesture that was an offer, rather than an invitation, the distinction being important to her. He said, "I do not want to interrupt your meal." She said, "You would be sitting across from it. That is not the same as interrupting it." He looked at her for a moment with an expression she could not quite read from across the diner. Then he said thank you, and came to the booth, and sat down across from her with the ease of someone who did not make sitting down in unfamiliar situations into more than it was. He was larger up close than he had appeared from across the room, which was usually the case with people of his physical scale, the full reality of them becoming apparent only in proximity. He had dark hair that was slightly overlong, and a beard that was at the point between deliberate and circumstantial, and a face that had been weathered by something. Not age specifically, but experience. The particular weathering that came from having been through things that left a mark and learning to carry the mark without performing it. He ordered coffee from the waitress, who appeared with the efficiency of someone who had watched the seating resolution with approval and wanted to capitalize on the goodwill. He ordered it simply, just coffee. And when the waitress left, he looked at the table and at the soup and the sandwich and the pie and the coffee already there. And he said, "You were planning company." She said, "I was planning hunger." She gestured at the excess. She said, "I ordered in excess of what I need, which I do sometimes when I am tired. It is one of my less strategic habits." He said, "Less strategic." He said it with the slight quality of someone tasting a phrase and finding it interesting. She said, "I have a professional habit of framing things in terms of strategy." She said it without apology, only as an accurate description of an occupational tendency. She said, "It extends into ordinary life more than is probably ideal." He said, "What do you do?" She said, "I run a company." She said it the way she always said it in contexts where the specifics were not relevant, plainly, and without the additional information that turned it into a statement of significance. She said, "What do you do?" He said, "I build things." He said it with the same plainness. He said, "Currently I am building a school," he said, "or I was until this afternoon, when the primary contractor told me the materials I was expecting on Wednesday are not coming on Wednesday, and the timeline I had built everything around is now a question rather than a fact." She said, "What kind of school?" He said, "A vocational one. In the Kapotnia district, for young people who are not served well by the standard educational routes, and who need something more specific and more practical." He said this without the particular tone of someone explaining a charity, without the slight inflation that people sometimes gave to virtuous projects to signal their virtue. He said it as a person describes work they find genuinely important and are currently frustrated about. She said, "Who funds it?" He said, "I do, mostly some smaller grants." He said, "It was supposed to open in March." He said, "March is now a question, along with everything else." His coffee arrived. He thanked the waitress with the brief genuine thanks of someone for whom thanking people was a habit rather than a performance. She looked at him across the table. She looked at the way he held the coffee cup, and the way he had sat down in an unfamiliar booth in an unfamiliar situation, and immediately become entirely comfortable in it. Not the comfort of someone performing ease, but the genuine kind. The kind that came from a settled relationship with yourself, that did not require external circumstances to cooperate. She said, "What is the specific problem with the materials?" He said, "The supplier I contracted with has a cash flow issue that has affected their ability to fulfill on time." He said, "They have the materials." They do not have the operational capacity to deliver them in the window I need, because the cash flow issue has created a staffing problem, he said. It is the kind of cascading consequence that is entirely logical in retrospect and entirely invisible until it happened. She said, "Have you spoken to the supplier directly? Not to the account manager, to the person who runs the operation." He looked at her. She said, "Cash flow problems at operational companies are usually resolvable if you talk to the right person about the right solution. An account manager's job is to manage the account within existing parameters. The person who runs the operation has the authority to change the parameters if the alternative is losing a contract entirely." She said, "If you speak to them directly and offer a partial advance against the delivery, you may find the staffing problem resolves itself faster than the timeline you were given assumes." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at her with the full direct attention she had noticed when he first sat down, the quality of someone who listened properly rather than waiting for their turn. He said, "You have done this before." She said, "I have been in versions of this situation from both sides." She said, "The cascading consequence is always more solvable than it looks at the moment it cascades. You simply have to find the original point of pressure and address that rather than the symptom." He said, "You said you run a company." She said, "Yes." He said, "What kind?" She told him. She watched him receive the information without the adjustment that some people made when they understood the scale of what she ran, the slight recalibration of how they were speaking to her, the subtle shift in register. He received it without adjustment, which told her that either he did not know what Novisvet Holdings was, which was possible, or that he was the kind of person for whom the information did not change anything, which was rarer. She found herself hoping it was the second. They talked for an hour about his school and her company, and the particular challenges of building things in a city that had strong opinions about how building should be done and expressed those opinions primarily through bureaucracy. About the Kapotnya district, which she knew professionally as a data point in a regional development analysis, and which he knew as a place where he had been working 3 days a week for 8 months, and had developed specific feelings about the difference between those two kinds of knowing, and what each one missed about the reality. She ate the soup and most of the sandwich and half the pie. She pushed the remaining pie toward the center of the table without thinking about it, a gesture that was purely practical rather than social. The instinct of someone redistributing resources to where they were needed. He looked at the pie. He said, "Are you certain?" She said, "Are you certain?" She said, "I ordered it in excess of what I needed. I said that at the beginning." He took the fork and ate the remaining pie with the uncomplicated appreciation of someone who was hungry and had been given pie and found both of these things unremarkable and satisfying. She watched him and felt something that she did not immediately name, because she was out of practice, naming things that were not professional categories. The rain on the window was doing what it had been doing, blurring the city into suggestions of itself. The hard, definite lights becoming something softer and less certain. Her phone showed a message from her driver. The car was 10 minutes away. She said, "My car is coming." He said, "All right." She said, "The supplier, call the owner directly tomorrow morning, early, before 9. People who run operational businesses are always in earlier than the people who work for them, and they answer their own phones before the day gets complicated." She said, "Tell them you understand the situation and you are prepared to advance 30% against confirmed delivery within your original window." She said, The number will be enough to solve the staffing problem, and the confirmation gives them the certainty they need to commit. She said, "It will work." He looked at her across the table in the warm light of the diner, with the rain on the window behind her, and he said, "Why are you telling me this?" She said, "Because you are building a school in Kapotnia for young people who need something specific and practical, and you are frustrated about a timeline, and I know how to solve the timeline, and it seemed like the relevant thing to offer." He said, "You do not know me." She said, "I know that you ordered just coffee and thanked the waitress properly and ate the pie without making anything of it, and have been talking to me for an hour without once adjusting the way you speak because of what I run." She said, "That is more than most people offer and considerably longer." He was quiet. He looked at her with the complete direct attention that she had been on the receiving end of for an hour, and that she realized, more comfortable than she had expected. He said, "I want to tell you something." He said it quietly, with the quality of someone who has been considering whether to say it and has decided. She said, "All right." He leaned forward slightly across the table, not in the way of someone performing intimacy, but in the way of someone who wanted to be certain they were heard properly. He said, "I have been in this diner before, several times." He said, "I have seen you here before, twice on evenings when it was raining," he said. "Both times I sat at the counter because every booth was occupied." He said, "Tonight every booth was occupied except yours, and I was going to sit at the counter again." He said, "I want you to know that when you said there was room here, I understood it as a practical offer about seating." He said, "But I've been sitting here for an hour, and I want to be honest with you before your car arrives." He said, "I am very glad the rain was heavy enough tonight that you needed to come inside." She looked at him across the table. The warm diner light was on his face, and the rain was on the window, and the city was blurring itself into something softer outside, and inside the food was mostly eaten, and the coffee was warm, and there was a conversation behind them that had been one of the most real she had had in a considerable time. She said, "I am also glad about the rain." He said, "Can I ask your name?" He said, "I know what you run." "I do not know your name." She said, "Masha." He said, "Alexei." She said, "Alexei." She said it the way you say a name when you are putting it somewhere you intend to keep it. He said it back to her, "Masha." The same way, her phone showed another message. The car was outside. She put on her coat. She gathered her things with the practiced efficiency of someone who left places professionally and quickly. She stood up from the booth. She looked at him still sitting there with his coffee, and the empty plates between them and the rain on the window. She said, "Call the supplier tomorrow morning early." He said, "I will." She said, "Let me know if it works." He said, "I do not have your number." She looked at him. She reached into her coat pocket and took out a card and set it on the table beside the empty pie plate. She said, "That is my direct line, not the office number," she said. "Use it for the supplier update." She paused. She said, "And after that, if you want to tell me how the school is going." He looked at the card. He looked up at her. He said, "And after that." She said, "And after that," she said. "And after that, we can discuss what after that means when we get there." He picked up the card. He held it with the care of someone handling something they intend to keep. He said, "The school opens in March." She said, "It will open in March." He said, "You sound certain." She said, "I am certain." She said, "I told you the timeline is solvable. I do not say things I am not certain about." he said. I am beginning to understand that. She walked to the door of the diner. At the door she stopped and looked back at him across the warm room, sitting in the booth by the rain-streaked window with her card in his hand, and the empty plates between them, and the particular expression of someone who has had an unexpected evening and is sitting with the full quality of it. She raised one hand. He raised his. She went out into the rain where her car was waiting, and got in and sat back and looked at the city through the wet window as the car moved through it, and thought about honest versions of people, and unguarded moments, and the way the lights dissolve through rain into something softer than they were when you looked at them directly. She thought about a man who had thanked the waitress properly, and eaten the pie without making anything of it, and said, I am very glad the rain was heavy enough tonight before her car arrived. She thought about March. She thought it was going to be a very good month,